A 20-year-old kid from Houston, belting gospel tunes as a boy, skyrockets to TikTok fame with Romantic Homicide, racking up millions of views. But behind the spotlight lurks a nightmare. On September 8, 2025, Lel cracks open the trunk of his Tesla in Los Angeles and discovers the mutilated body of a 15-year-old girl, hacked to pieces, wrapped in trags, and rotting away. She was Celeste, die-hard fan or secret lover. With creepy texts, matching tattoos, and lyrics screaming, "I'm obsessed," this twisted truth will send shivers down your spine. Don't scroll past, the story's just getting started. He was born on March 28, 2005, in Queens, New York, a city that moves fast and never really sleeps. But his story wouldn't stay rooted there for long. When he was still young, his family made the move to Houston, Texas. The change wasn't just about location, it shaped the way he saw the world. Houston carried a different rhythm, a slower pulse compared to Queens, yet it offered a kind of space where a shy, creative kid could start to dream bigger. By the time he reached 7th grade, his parents chose homeschooling, a decision that pulled him out of the traditional classroom and into a world where learning was more personal, but also more isolating. It gave him time, to explore music, to sketch out melodies in his head, to try things most kids' age weren't thinking about. Music had always been a quiet companion, but at 13 it took on a louder voice. He started out singing gospel, filling the room with sounds that were raw, unpolished, but heartfelt. Gospel gave him a sense of emotion and depth, but at the same time he was drawn toward a different fire. Artists like Lil Pump and XXXTentacion began to influence him, their energy, their pain, their chaos, he soaked it all in. That mix of gospel roots and the stormy power of modern rap created a strange chemistry inside him, something that would later spill into the music he made for the world to hear. Looking back, those early years were not just about dates and places. They were about a boy caught between two cities, two styles of music, two sides of himself, faith and rebellion, slowly figuring out how to blend them into his own voice. Every story has a starting point, and for him it wasn't a big studio or a spotlight on stage. It was 2021, a laptop, and a SoundCloud account. Like so many young dreamers, he began by posting tracks online, often attached to Fortnite montages. The songs weren't polished, but they carried a spark, raw, experimental, and filled with emotion. That combination caught the attention of small communities who stumbled across his music while scrolling through the endless sea of uploads. It was the beginning of something much bigger than he could have imagined. The real breakthrough came in 2022 with a song that almost felt accidental at first. Romantic Homicide wasn't made with charts in mind, it was haunting, simple, and deeply personal, a track that spoke to feelings of heartbreak and distance. Then TikTok found it. Within weeks, millions of short videos were using the sound, pushing it from internet curiosity to mainstream obsession. The numbers exploded, and suddenly wasn't just a kid uploading songs, he was an artist with a viral hit. By the end of that year, Romantic Homicide climbed all the way to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, placing him shoulder to shoulder with stars who had been in the game for decades. Success didn't slow him down. In 2023 he released his first EP, Petals to Thorns. It felt like a statement of intent, vulnerable yet confident, mixing delicate melodies with darker undertones. Critics and fans alike began to see that this wasn't just a one-hit wonder story. There was range, vision, and a growing identity that belonged to him alone. By 2024, his career reached another level. He landed a spot touring with SCA, an artist whose own path had been defined by honesty and experimentation. Sharing the stage with her gave him exposure to massive crowds and proved that he could hold his own in front of tens of thousands. Each performance became another step in turning internet buzz into real-world staying power. Then came 2025, and with it both triumph and chaos. His appearance at Coachella was supposed to be a defining moment for a young star on one of the biggest stages in the world. The performance had energy, spectacle, and passion, but it also brought headlines for the wrong reason. In a burst of adrenaline, he attempted a backflip on stage, only to land badly and crash to the ground. The clip spread instantly, a viral reminder that live shows carry risks no matter how well rehearsed. Still, fans expected the world tour to follow, a celebration of how he had come in such a short time. But then the news hit, the entire tour was cancelled. No details could soften the blow. For an artist who had built momentum brick by brick, the sudden halt left questions hanging in the air. His career so far reads like a roller coaster: humble beginnings, meteoric rise, unforgettable highs, and sudden stumbles. What comes next is uncertain, but one thing is clear. He has already left a mark, and his story is still being written. Behind the lights and the viral moments, his personal life tells a quieter story, one that shows a young artist still trying to balance belief, privacy, and the pressures of fame. From the start, faith has been a central part of who he is. Before stepping up to perform or before recording a song, he's been known to pause, bow his head, and pray. It isn't a performance for the cameras, but a private ritual that reminds him of where he comes from and what keeps him grounded. That thread of belief runs through his music too, sometimes hidden in the background, other times woven into the emotion that fans feel even if they don't always recognize the source. At the same time, he's drawn clear lines around what he shares and what he protects. In an age where every post can turn into a storm, he's chosen to turn off comments and keep a wall between his art and the noise of strangers. Some saw it as distance, but for him it was about peace of mind, protecting himself from the negativity that often comes when success comes fast. It was a way of taking control, of making sure that his focus stayed on the music instead of the chatter. That sense of protecting his image also reached into his business moves. Early collaborations with lifestyle brands gave him exposure, but not every partnership lasted. Campaigns with fashion and footwear companies were quietly pulled back, reminders that image is fragile when the public eye is sharp and unforgiving. He learned quickly that the same spotlight that builds a career can also burn it if you're not careful. Taken together, his personal life reveals someone who is both bold and cautious, a performer willing to share pieces of his soul through music, but careful about what he lets the world see beyond the stage. In many ways, that tension between openness and privacy is what makes him relatable. He's not just a rising artist, he's a young man trying to hold on to faith, protect his peace, and still reach for dreams bigger than himself. When the news broke, the silence didn't last long. Within hours, attention shifted from the music to the man himself. Every headline carried his name, every whisper carried a judgment. Fans and critics wanted answers, and the pressure only grew heavier with each new revelation. It didn't take long before a spokesperson stepped forward, offering the only official line: he was cooperating. The words were meant to cool the fire, to assure the public that he wasn't hiding, that he was willing to stand under the same light that had once made him famous. But for many, it wasn't enough. Cooperation didn't erase the questions that lingered, and it didn't erase the images already burned into people's minds. Behind that polished statement was a family caught in the storm. Fame had always been a double-edged sword, but this time the cut went deep. Instead of applause, his parents and siblings faced something darker: threats. Strangers filled their inboxes with anger, suspicion, even danger. What had once been ordinary routines, walking to the store, answering the phone, suddenly carried a shadow. People they had never met felt entitled to judgment, even revenge. It was as if the world had turned their home into a courtroom, with no walls high enough to keep out the noise. For the family, it was a bitter reminder of how quickly public fascination can turn into public fury. They had once celebrated his success together, proud of the boy from Queens who had carried his voice across the world. Now they were watching that same spotlight expose them, pulling them into a narrative they never chose. Their only defense was to close ranks, to lean on each other, while shutting the rest of the world out. Friends described them as protective, watchful, and deeply shaken, but determined to survive the storm until the truth became clearer. Meanwhile, the spokesperson's careful words continued to circulate. He is cooperating. The phrase repeated on screens and in conversations, both shield and burden. To some, it sounded like accountability. To others, it felt like spin. Every time the line was repeated, it reminded people of just how fragile his position had become. Cooperation meant he wasn't running, but it didn't mean he was free. The combination of public scrutiny, official silence, and personal threats left an impression that went far beyond the music industry. It raised questions about what happens when a celebrity collides with scandal, when private families become collateral damage, and when words like cooperation become both a promise and a plea. In the end, the reactions told their own story: an artist balancing on the edge of his career, a family under siege from people who didn't know them, and a public that couldn't look away. The fallout wasn't just about one person, it was about the way society responds when the line between fame and infamy suddenly disappears. She came into the world around 2010, born in Lake Elsinore, California, a small city tucked between mountains and the desert. From the outside, Lake Elsinore can seem peaceful, a lakeside town where families gather for summer days and teenagers grow restless, dreaming of bigger places. But her childhood was not painted with the same calm. Even from an early age, life at home was complicated. The walls carried arguments instead of laughter, and too often, the neighbors heard things no child should grow up with. By the time she was entering her teenage years, the cracks inside the family were no longer hidden. Police records later revealed that between February 2024 and April 2025, officers were called to the home 11 separate times. 11 calls in little more than a year, each one a reminder that the house she lived in wasn't a safe harbor, but a storm that rarely let up. Those calls weren't just numbers on a page. They were signs of nights when shouting grew too loud, when someone finally dialed for help, when the chaos could no longer be contained. For a girl in her early teens, It meant growing up in an environment where uncertainty was the only certainty. Friends and teachers would later say she carried a quiet resilience. She tried to carve out her own world beyond the conflict, holding close to the small joys that gave her comfort: music, time with friends, fleeting moments of laughter. But even resilience has limits when the foundation beneath it is shaky. She was old enough to understand instability, but too young to escape it on her own. That tension shaped her adolescence, forcing her to mature faster than she should have, and it left scars that didn't always show on the surface. In telling her story, people often rush to the tragedy of her death. But to understand that ending, it's important to look at the life that came before it. The girl who grew up in a house where police cars became a familiar sight, who carried the weight of instability that wasn't her fault. It wasn't just a single night or a single event, it was years of living in a place that was supposed to feel safe, but rarely did. When the investigation into her death began, rumors spread quickly. In stories like this, speculation often runs faster than facts, and one of the loudest whispers was that she had been pregnant. It became a piece of gossip that traveled online and off, as if that detail could somehow explain the tragedy or make it sharper. But when the results came back, the truth was clear: she was not pregnant. The confirmation cut through the noise, but it also highlighted how much people wanted to project their own theories onto her story. In reality, she was simply a 15-year-old girl, still navigating life, still trying to make sense of who she was becoming. That single fact that she was not pregnant doesn't erase the tragedy, but it does matter. It reminds us that the truth is often simpler, and far more human, than the rumors people build around it. She wasn't living out some dramatic storyline. She was a teenager who grew up in a home where police came too often, who carried her own private dreams, and who never got the chance to grow past the shadows cast over her early years. Her childhood wasn't defined by dates on a calendar, or by police reports alone. It was defined by a struggle for normalcy, for stability, for a chance at the kind of life every child deserves. And when we talk about her, we should remember not only the tragedy that ended her story, but also the difficult beginnings that shaped it. The pattern didn't appear overnight. It built slowly, like a shadow that kept returning, until it became impossible to ignore. Her history of disappearing wasn't just a string of dates, it was the story of a girl searching for an escape, for something different than the chaos she carried at home. Each time she left, it sent her family, her friends, and eventually strangers into a storm of fear, rumors, and desperate searches. The first time was February 14, 2024, Valentine's Day, a date that should have been about flowers, laughter, and candy at school. Instead, she vanished. At just 13, she walked out into a world much bigger than she was, leaving behind the walls of a home that had felt more like a battlefield. Police reports described the event in clinical terms, but for those around her, it was panic. Hours stretched into days. Where could a young teenager go? Who would she trust? When she was finally located, relief flooded in, but the relief was temporary. She had returned physically, but emotionally, the rift between her and her home life seemed only deeper. Barely a month later, in March 2024, it happened again. This time the search moved faster because everyone had already seen the signs. Flyers went up, calls were made, friends were questioned. Once again, she had slipped into the city, chasing freedom, maybe chasing belonging, maybe she was found. The same questions resurfaced. Why was she leaving? Who was she meeting? And could anyone stop her from trying again? The final disappearance came on April 5, 2024. She was still only 13. By then, the cycle had become heartbreakingly familiar: report, another frantic call for help. But this time, the story took a darker turn. She wasn't just missing for a night or two. She had made her way all the way to Hollywood. For the first time, those around her heard her speak openly about the people she was seeing. She mentioned a rapper from Los Angeles, someone older, someone whose world seemed exciting compared to the instability she had grown up with. It was a dangerous mix: her vulnerability meeting someone else's power. Finding her in Hollywood was both a relief and a warning. She was alive, but she was moving further away from the safety net of childhood. She had crossed into a world that promised glamour but carried risks far beyond her years. Friends later recalled that she seemed fascinated by that scene: the lights, the music, the idea of being connected to someone important. To a 13-year-old, it might have felt like a door opening to something better. To the adults watching, it was a door opening into danger. These three disappearances, February, March, and April of 2024, created a timeline of warning signs. They showed how deeply she wanted to break free from the chaos of her home life, but also how vulnerable she was to the influence of people who did not have her best interests at heart. Each return was temporary, a pause before the next attempt, until the final time pulled her into a circle she couldn't escape. Looking back, it's easy to say the signs were there. The police calls to her house, the repeated vanishings, the mention of a much older rapper in Los Angeles. Each piece was a red flag, but at the time, they were scattered clues, not a complete picture. It's only now, in hindsight, that the story lines up so clearly. Her history of disappearing isn't just a tragic timeline. It's a reflection of a young life caught between wanting safety and craving freedom, between childhood and adulthood, between danger and hope. At 13, she should have been worrying about school dances and weekend plans. Instead, she was walking streets in Hollywood, whispering about rappers and futures that would never come. Every life, no matter how short, is filled with the little things that make a person who they are. For her, those small details told a story of a girl who was still figuring herself out, part child, part teenager, and already carrying the marks of choices far beyond her years. She loved Spider-Man. It might seem simple, almost ordinary, but to her it wasn't just about the movies or the comics. Friends said she lit up when talking about the character. A Peter Parker tried to balance the chaos of his own life while still trying to do good. In a way, maybe she saw herself in that struggle, a kid caught between two worlds, trying to grow up too quickly, but still hanging on to pieces of innocence. Loving Spider-Man wasn't just a hobby. It was a glimpse into the side of her that still held on to imagination and hope, even when her real life was messy and unpredictable. But alongside that childlike admiration came the marks of a teenager searching for identity. One of those marks was literal. On her finger, she had tattooed the letters, "Shh." Nobody could ever fully agree on what it meant. Some thought it was shorthand for "shh," a quiet sign of secrecy. Others wondered if it pointed to someone or something in her life. Whatever the meaning, it was permanent ink on a hand that was still so young, a silent message etched into skin that hadn't finished growing. There was another tattoo, bolder, harder to ignore, the name, David, inked across her chest. It wasn't hidden or subtle. It was a declaration, one that tied her identity to someone else in a way most kids her age couldn't even imagine. To wear another person's name so visibly at 13 spoke volumes about how deep she believed her connection was. It was devotion, vulnerability, and perhaps a cry to be seen, all wrapped into a few dark letters against pale skin. Her presence wasn't confined to real-life encounters, either. She appeared in Twitch streams connected to David, moments where she was no longer just a private figure, but a face in the background of a public broadcast. For those watching closely, it was startling proof that she wasn't just a rumor or a fleeting connection. She was there, part of his world, woven into the content he shared with fans. These appearances weren't long or polished, but they were enough to raise questions, enough to leave an imprint in the memory of anyone who watched. Taken together, these pieces, her love of Spider-Man, her tattoos, her quiet appearances on streams, paint a portrait of a girl suspended between youth and adulthood. She still admired superheroes but also maces that bound her to people and situations far beyond her years. They show a girl searching for belonging, carving her story into her skin and into the digital spaces where she felt noticed. In the end, her interests weren't just hobbies or passing phases. They were windows into her spirit, hopeful, impulsive, desperate for connection, and trying to build an identity in a world that never gave her enough time. When a young life ends too soon, what remains is not just silence, it is memory. For her, the legacy she left behind became visible in the ways people came together after her death. A memorial was held, a gathering where friends, relatives, and even strangers who had only known her story stood side by side. Candles flickered, photos of her smiling face were held up, and voices cracked as they tried to speak about a girl who should have had decades ahead of her. In moments like these, a community doesn't just mourn, it clings to one another, as if holding each other close could somehow keep her present. One of the clearest signs of her impact came through the fundraiser created in her name. A GoFundMe page, simple but powerful, described her as a beloved daughter. The words may have been few, but they carried the weight of her family's love and loss. People who had never met her donated, leaving comments filled with prayers, condolences, and shock. For her family, those contributions weren't just financial support, they were reminders that her life had touched far more people than they realized. Every dollar, every message, was proof that her story had moved hearts beyond their small circle. At the center of all of this was her family, broken in ways that words can't fully capture. They had lived through the turbulence of her childhood, the worry of her disappearances, and now the final heartbreak of her loss. To them, she wasn't a headline or a case to be analyzed. She was their daughter, their sister, the little girl they had once held, laughed with, and fought for. In private moments, their grief was raw tears that seemed endless, the ancient emptiness in rooms that once echoed with her voice. Publicly, they shared gratitude for the support they received, but nothing could soften the truth that their lives would never be the same. The memorial, the fundraiser, the words, beloved daughter. They form her legacy. Not in charts or records, not in fame or fortune, but in the love she inspired and the sorrow her absence created. Her story became a reminder of how fragile life is, how quickly it can be taken, and how deeply a single young soul can affect those around her. In the end, her legacy is not only in the tragedy of her passing, but in the way people remember her. In the candles that burned for her, in the prayers whispered by strangers, in the family that will carry her in their hearts forever. She may be gone, but she is not forgotten. And for those who loved her most, that memory is both the heaviest burden and the most precious gift. Every story has a clock, and hers began ticking long before most people knew her name. The timeline that emerged after her death revealed not just dates, but a haunting progression that showed how a young life slipped further and further into danger. It started quietly in 2021, when she was just 12 years old. Online, she connected with David, who at the time was 16 going on 17. At first, it seemed like harmless communication messages traded back and forth, the kind of chats so many teenagers engage in without realizing how serious the consequences can become. But those early conversations on Discord weren't just passing words. They planted a seed, a relationship that would grow in ways neither her family nor her friends could fully control. Looking back, the age gap was striking, a 12-year-old girl, still barely out of childhood, entangled with someone older, already on the cusp of adulthood. Fast forward to February and March of 2024. By then she was 13, and the pattern of vanishing had begun. Twice she went missing, each disappearance tied to her growing connection with David. When police and family finally tracked her down, the story that emerged was unsettling. She had been following him, seeking out the world he represented. It wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was the start of a bond that pulled her away from the safety of her own home and deeper into his orbit. Each time she returned, the fear only grew sharper. Would this be the last time she came back? By April 2025, that fear had become reality. She was no longer sneaking out for days at a time when she was living with him. At just 14, she entered the world of Hollywood Hills, sustained by fake IDs that allowed her to pass as older than she was. Neighbors would later say they looked like a couple, moving through the neighborhood as if everything was normal. But behind the closed doors, her age and her vulnerability told a different story. The months stretched from April to August, and in that span she lived a life far removed from the girl who once loved Spider-Man and clung to childhood comforts. Then came August 2025. It was around that time her story reached its tragic end. She was found lifeless, her name now tied forever to the man whose world she had entered years earlier through a simple online connection. The progression from a chat window in 2021 to her death 4 years later tells a chilling story of grooming, deception, and a young girl caught in a current too strong for her to swim against. This timeline isn't just a list of events, it's a map of how innocence can be eroded step by step. From those first digital messages to the disappearances in 2024, to the months in Hollywood under false identities, every point shows a life moving further from safety until it ended far too soon. When investigators and the public began piecing her story together, it wasn't just words or testimonies that told the tale, it was images and videos. Frozen moments and fleeting clips became clues, each one revealing a layer of the connection she had with David, and the darker undertones hiding beneath what seemed at first like ordinary snapshots of youth. One of the earliest resurfaced pieces was a photo from October 2023. In it, the two of them stand together, his shirt a bold Billie Eilish design that instantly caught attention. At the time, the picture might have looked like nothing more than a casual moment between friends. But when revisited after her disappearance, the photo carried a heavier weight. It was proof of their closeness, of their time together long before the headlines, and it stirred questions. How old was she then? And how long had this bond been developing in secret? Then there were the Twitch streams, moments captured not on a stage, but in the casual digital space where fans tuned in to watch him. Twice she appeared on those streams, slipping into frame, her presence subtle but undeniable. And then came the demand, delete the views. The urgency with which he wanted those videos erased only fueled suspicion. Why erase them if there was nothing to hide? For many observers, the streams became evidence not just of her presence, but of his awareness of how dangerous those appearances might look. Another moment unfolded during a concert. In the middle of the crowd, while she was missing, he looked out and made a heart sign with his hands, directed toward her. To fans, it may have seemed like a sweet gesture, a simple acknowledgement. But to investigators and critics, it was something else entirely, an unsettling sign of intimacy, of recognition that their lives were tangled together even as questions mounted about where she was and who she was with. Perhaps the most haunting piece came from July 30, 2024, during his show at the Warfield in San Francisco. There, on stage, a prop casket and mock memorial were part of the performance. Some in the audience saw it as creative, symbolic, even theatrical. But later, in the context of her disappearance and tragic death, the imagery took on a chilling resonance. A coffin, a mock memorial. On a stage months before her life would end, it felt less like art and more like foreshadowing, a dark echo of what was to come. Each of these images and clips, scattered across time, became part of the narrative that followed her. A photo in a Billie Eilish shirt, a few seconds on a Twitch stream, a heart-shaped gesture in a crowd, a coffin on stage together. They tell a story of a connection that played out in public view, while so much was hidden behind the curtain. And in the end, those fragments became more than just moments. They became evidence, raising questions that still linger about what was happening behind the scenes all along. If the photos and videos offered glimpses of their connection in public, the messages and social clips revealed what happened behind the curtain. Together, they formed a pattern intimate, impulsive, and at times disturbing that painted a clearer picture of how far things had gone and how long it had been building. The earliest signs came from Discord. Screenshots from 2022 showed conversations that went beyond casual friendship. In them, David called her babe, a term of endearment that might not have stood out if both had been older. But at the time, she was just 12. Those small words, preserved in digital screenshots, carried heavy meaning. They were proof that the relationship had crossed a boundary early, blurring the line between playful chat and something far more inappropriate. What could have been dismissed as harmless banter suddenly looked much darker when viewed in hindsight. Then there was the resurfaced TikTok. In the clip, he was chopping meat with a knife, captioned with a jealous, almost threatening joke, "Me if I see her talking with other dudes." On its own, it might have been brushed off as edgy humor. But after the tragedy, the video resurfaced with new context. Fans and critics debated whether it revealed something deeper about his mindset, possessiveness, anger, or even foreshadowing. What once might have seemed like teenage dramatics now looked like a chilling window into how he viewed her. In 2023, leaked messages from her side added another layer. Screenshots showed her confiding in friends, admitting openly that they were dating. For a 13-year-old to describe herself as being in a relationship with someone older highlighted just how far things had progressed. These weren't just whispers or rumors, these were her words, revealing a truth she had been carrying even when her family didn't fully know. And then came the most telling piece, his request to erase the evidence. In early 2024, after she appeared on a Twitch stream, a clip circulated showing him asking for the video to be deleted. The urgency in his voice said more than any carefully crafted statement could. He knew what the footage revealed, and he wanted it gone. To the public, that moment raised the biggest question of all. If there was nothing wrong, why was he so desperate to wipe it away? Taken together, the Discord chats, the TikTok, the leaked messages, and the deleted stream form a digital trail that cannot be ignored. Each piece, on its own, might be explained away as immaturity, bad judgment, or poor taste. But when placed side by side, they create a timeline of intimacy and secrecy, jealousy and concealment. In the world of true crime, it's often the small fragments, an offhand word, a half-joking video, a deleted clip that end up carrying the heaviest weight. And in her story, these fragments speak loudly. They tell us about a relationship that grew in shadows, sustained by messages and posts, until the truth could no longer be hidden. Sometimes, the most revealing pieces of a story don't come from investigators or leaked screenshots, but from the people who were closest to the situation. Their words, spoken in interviews or shared with reporters, fill in the spaces between the headlines. In this case, the testimonies from family, teachers, friends, and neighbors painted a hauntingly consistent picture of how deeply entangled she had become in David's world. Her mother was among the first to put it into words. In one interview, she admitted that her daughter had a boyfriend and his name was David. For any parent, it would have been alarming to discover that a 13-year-old was romantically connected to someone older. But, to hear it confirmed, stripped away any lingering doubt. It wasn't speculation or rumor anymore. It was an acknowledgement. Her daughter wasn't just missing. She was attached to someone whose influence was pulling her further away from home. Her former teacher added another layer. He described how she had run away to be with a rapper from Los Angeles. The statement cut through the vague details and made the situation painfully clear. This wasn't just a teenage crush, it was a deliberate move, a young girl leaving everything behind to chase the orbit of someone with status, music, and power. For the teacher, who had once seen her as a student in the classroom, it was heartbreaking. The girl he remembered was supposed to be safe at home, not slipping into the arms of an older figure from a world she couldn't possibly navigate. Then there were David's own friends. At parties they admitted they thought she was 19. To them, the relationship didn't look unusual. They saw a couple, side by side, moving through social scenes without raising suspicion. That detail that even his friends believed she was an adult spoke volumes about the disguise she was forced to wear. Fake IDs, altered appearances, and the simple fact that most people don't question what they don't want to see all combined to cloak the truth: she was just a child. And finally, there was the neighbor. Living in Hollywood Hills, this witness said what many had already suspected. The two of them were living together, presenting themselves like a couple. From the outside, it may have looked like ordinary two young people sharing a home. But underneath that image was a stark reality. She was only 14, far from her family, existing under a roof that symbolized not love, but concealment. Together, these voices formed a chorus of testimony. A mother's reluctant acknowledgement, a teacher's shock, friends who mistook her for an adult, and a neighbor who confirmed what others had whispered. Each one, on its own, was troubling. Together, they became impossible to ignore. These testimonies don't just tell us what happened. They reveal how an entire web of people, knowingly or unknowingly, became part of a narrative that ended in tragedy. And in the echoes of their words, we hear the same truth repeated. A young girl was living a life far beyond her years, and everyone who glimpsed it saw something was wrong, just too late to change how the story would end. In the end, one of the most disturbing parts of her story wasn't just the relationship itself, but the deliberate effort to hide it. The truth didn't just slip into the shadows, it was pushed there, covered by false identities, deleted evidence, and silence bought at a price. The first layer of concealment came in the form of fake IDs. She was only 13 and 14, but the cards in her pocket told a different story. They listed her as 18, sometimes 19, old enough to slip past bouncers, old enough to enter clubs and events where no child should have been. With those IDs, she moved beside David in public, blending into his world as if she belonged there. But what made it worse was the allegation that he knew her real age all along. This wasn't a mistake, a misunderstanding, or a case of being misled. It was a deliberate choice to use deception as a shield. But the hiding didn't stop at IDs. Digital evidence also came under attack. After she appeared on his Twitch stream, he quickly demanded that the VODs be deleted. To the outside world, it might have seemed like an artist protecting his image. But in context, it felt like panic and urgent attempt to erase proof that she had been there, right beside him, in a space fans could see. Every deleted clip, every vanished screenshot only raised more suspicion. If nothing was wrong, why try so hard to bury the evidence? Whispers also surfaced about bribes of friends and even moderators who were asked to stay quiet, to delete, to look the other way. Whether it was money, favors, or simple pressure, the effect was the same: silence. Those closest to him were expected to protect him, to scrub away any trace of what might reveal the truth. That pattern of concealment wasn't just about privacy. It was about survival, protecting a narrative that would otherwise collapse. And then came the most horrifying detail: the Tesla. In September 2025, she was discovered in the trunk of David's car, abandoned in a parking garage in Hollywood. The car had been sitting for weeks, collecting dust, a silent witness to everything that had happened. For many, the image was unbearable: a luxury vehicle turned into a tomb. It wasn't just concealment anymore. It was final, devastating proof of how far the lies had gone. Taken together, the fake IDs, the erased streams, the silenced friends, and the hidden car told a single story. Concealment wasn't an accident, it was a pattern. It showed intention, calculation, and the lengths to which someone would go to keep a secret hidden. For investigators, these pieces formed the backbone of the case. For the public, they became the haunting reminder that what we see on the surface, smiles, concerts, live streams, can cover something far darker. And for her family, they were proof that while the world debated, their daughter had been living in a web of deception that ended in tragedy. The call to 911 came on September 8, 2025. A parking garage in Hollywood, a car sitting abandoned for weeks, and a smell that no one could ignore. Residents and workers in the area had noticed it before, but that day the odor grew unbearable, forcing someone to finally pick up the phone. When officers arrived, they traced the source to a Tesla parked in a dusty corner of the structure. At first glance, it was just another neglected vehicle. But what they found inside would turn the investigation into something far darker. Opening the trunk, police discovered her remains. The body was not whole. It had been cut into pieces and sealed inside plastic bags. The condition was shocking even to seasoned investigators, an image that stayed with them long after they left the scene. For weeks, people had walked past that car, unaware that it was holding a secret this gruesome. Records later showed that the Tesla had been towed into the garage sometime in late August 2025. By the time it was found, the vehicle was covered in a fine layer of dust, its presence blending into the background of city life. Few people thought to question why such a car sat unused in the heat of Los Angeles. But the timeline mattered. If it had been parked there at the end of August, and she was discovered on September 8, It meant she had been inside for at least a couple of weeks. Decomposition confirmed this. Forensic teams determined that the remains had breaking down for some time before discovery. The heat trapped inside the car, combined with the sealed plastic, accelerated the process, leaving investigators with one of the most difficult recovery scenes possible. It was not the discovery of a missing person hoped alive, but the confirmation of a tragedy that many had feared. The details of how she ended up there were not immediately clear, but the method of concealment spoke volumes. To cut the body into pieces and wrap them in bags was not an accident, it was an attempt to delay discovery, to control the narrative for as long as possible. Yet in the end, the smell betrayed the secret. The body cannot be hidden forever, even behind metal doors and tinted glass. For her family, the confirmation was devastating. They had held out hope, no matter how small, that she might still be alive somewhere. Instead, the call they received was the one no parent ever wants: their daughter had been found. But not in the way they prayed for. The discovery of her inside the Tesla didn't just mark the end of her disappearance. It became the central piece of the case, a grim reminder of how far the situation had spiraled. From the early days of Discord messages to the months in Hollywood, everything led here to a car in a parking garage, carrying the weight of a story that had finally reached its most horrifying conclusion. On September 16, 2025, the case took a grim but necessary step forward. After weeks of speculation and anguish, the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office officially confirmed the identity of the body found inside the abandoned Tesla. It was Celeste. She was just 15 years old. The confirmation brought an end to the brief, fragile hope that somehow, the remains might not be hers. Her family, friends, and even parts of the public had clung to that faint possibility that there had been some mistake, that maybe she was still alive somewhere, waiting to be found. But when the announcement came, there was no more room for denial. The girl who had gone missing in the spring of 2024, the girl whose story had become tangled with rumors, testimonies, and digital traces was gone. The medical examiner's report did not bring clarity about how she died. Instead, it deferred the cause of death. Toxicology tests were pending, further examinations required, but no official conclusion could yet be drawn. That silence left a void, one quickly filled by speculation. Was it violence? Was it drugs? Did someone end her life deliberately, or was it the result of neglect and recklessness? The uncertainty only deepened the pain, leaving her loved ones without closure and the public without answers. What struck many observers most was the chilling timeline. According to the findings, Celeste had not been verifiably seen alive since 2024. That meant more than a year had passed without her presence being truly confirmed, even as rumors and sightings circulated. Her last known period of life placed her in Hollywood, moving within a world far removed from her beginnings in Lake Elsinore. To realize she had been absent for so long, hidden in plain sight, made the loss feel even sharper. For her family, the confirmation was starting and strangely grounding. The uncertainty was over, they no longer had to endure the endless cycle of hope and despair. But the finality of it was crushing. Their daughter, their sister, had been found. But the questions that mattered most, what exactly happened, and why, were still unanswered. For investigators, the deferred cause of death meant the case remained wide open. They had a name, an identity, a victim. But without knowing how she died, they could not yet chart the path forward. Was this homicide, an overdose, an accident covered up with panic? The condition of the remains made those answers harder to find, but they would be critical in determining accountability. And for the wider community, the confirmation was a turning point. It transformed the story from a disappearance into a homicide investigation. It moved the conversation from searching for a missing teenager to demanding justice for a life cut short. September 16 was not the end of her story, it was another chapter, marked by heartbreak, uncertainty, and the relentless demand for answers. Celeste, just 15 years old, was gone. What remained was the responsibility to uncover the truth about how, and why, her life ended the way it did. On the morning of September 18, 2025, the investigation took a dramatic turn. What had until then been whispers, leaks, and speculation suddenly became concrete action. Armed officers surrounded the Hollywood Hills property where David had been staying. Neighbors watched from their windows as law enforcement, dressed in tactical gear and carrying weapons, moved into position. The quiet of the street was shattered by the unmistakable intensity of a raid. This wasn't a routine knock on the door. The decision to arrive armed and prepared for confrontation showed how seriously investigators were treating the case. By that point, they already had the most damning piece of evidence, the discovery of Celeste inside his Tesla. Now they needed the digital trail, the hidden communications, and any trace of planning or cover-up that might be buried inside the devices he used every day. Once inside, officers carried out a systematic search. Rooms were cleared one by one, belongings photographed and logged. But the focus wasn't just on physical spaces. It was on technology. Investigators seized multiple electronic devices, phones, laptops, hard drives, and even older computers that had been pushed into closets. To detectives, these items were potentially as valuable as fingerprints or DNA. They could reveal years of messages, files, and connections that might explain how a teenage girl ended up living in his home under fake IDs, and ultimately how she ended up in the trunk of his car. Witnesses later described the raid as swift and overwhelming. They came in with guns drawn, one neighbor recalled, like they were expecting something to go wrong. That show of force was deliberate. Authorities couldn't risk losing evidence, nor could they take the chance that he might resist or attempt to destroy files before they were secured. For David, the raid marked a breaking point. Until then, his representatives had insisted he was cooperating. But the armed entry sent a different message. Law enforcement no longer viewed this as voluntary. They were taking what they needed, with or without his permission. The sight of officers carrying out boxes of electronics became a symbol of the case. Cameras caught glimpses of evidence bags filled with cords, devices, and folders. To outsiders, it looked like just hardware. But to prosecutors, it represented the possibility of answers. Messages on Discord, deleted photos, hidden files, or private logs could become the key to proving intent, grooming, and concealment. By the end of the day, the home was left in disarray, the property stripped of anything that could hold a digital secret. Neighbors lingered on the sidewalk, shaken by what they had witnessed. And across the city, headlines spread. Investigators had raided David's house with weapons drawn, seizing devices that might finally reveal the truth behind Celeste's disappearance and death. The raid of September 18 wasn't just another step in the timeline, it was a turning point. It showed that authorities were no longer just investigating. They were building a case, one piece of seized evidence at a time. After the raid on September 18, 2025, many expected the next headline to announce an arrest. The image of officers storming the property, seizing devices, and hauling out boxes of evidence seemed like the prelude to handcuffs. But when the dust settled, that moment never came. David was not arrested. For the public, it was confusing, even enraging. How could a young girl be discovered in the trunk of his Tesla, and yet he remained free? To many, the lack of immediate charges felt like injustice. Social media erupted with demands for answers, while supporters of the investigation reminded everyone that building a case takes time, especially one involving digital evidence, autopsy collays, and forensic analysis. Still, the optics were stark. The suspect walked away, while the victim's family mourned. Into this silence stepped his manager, offering the first and only real defense. The statement was careful, almost surgical in tone. He was not directly involved. The manager insisted, painting the picture of an artist caught in circumstances beyond his control. The phrasing was deliberate, and not directly involved, left room for interpretation, a shield without actually denying the connection. To some, it sounded like protection. To others, it sounded like spin. Either way, it became the headline repeated across the country. The Los Angeles Police Department, meanwhile, stayed quiet. Requests for comment were met with the same response: they could not discuss an active investigation. It was a move both strategic and frustrating. By saying nothing, Lapid avoided jeopardizing the case in court. But to the public, silence felt like secrecy. Every unanswered question became fuel for speculation. Was he being shielded because of his fame? Were investigators struggling to prove what seemed obvious? Or were they quietly building something stronger than the public realized? For legal analysts watching from the outside, the strategy made sense. Without a confirmed cause of death, without toxicology results, without a clear chain tying him to the act itself, an arrest too soon could backfire. If prosecutors moved ahead without airtight evidence, the case risked collapsing under the weight of reasonable doubt. Better to wait, to sift through the seized devices, to match timestamps and messages, to let the science of forensics fill the gaps. But for the family, waiting felt unbearable. They had buried their daughter, launched memorials, and endured threats from strangers. Now, they had to live with the knowledge that the man tied to her disappearance was still walking free, still shielded by careful statements and legal caution. In the weeks that followed, the tension only grew. Every day without an arrest deepened the divide between what the public felt and what the law required. The raid had shown force, but the silence that followed showed restraint. Together, they left the world in limbo. Justice seemed close, but still just out of reach. The legal reaction after the raid was not an ending, but a pause in a space filled with uncertainty, speculation, and grief. The case was moving forward, but slowly, methodically, as if justice itself was holding its breath. When people look back on her story, one of the most disturbing threads is the question of grooming. It was not simply about a relationship gone wrong, it was about how that relationship began, the imbalance that defined it from the start, and the motives that might have driven it forward. The age gap itself was undeniable. When they first began speaking in 2021, she was just 12. He was already 16, turning 17, standing on the edge of adulthood. At that age, even a few years' difference is enormous. She was still a child, barely beginning to figure out who she was. He was older, more experienced, and in a position of influence. That imbalance set the stage for what would later become one of the central accusations: grooming. The process by which an older figure slowly builds trust, affection, and dependency in someone too young to understand the risks. Evidence of that emotional grip appeared in his music. In 2023, he recorded a track that fans would later refer to as the Celeste demo. In it, the lyrics repeated the word obsessed, a theme that took on chilling weight after the fact. Was it just a love song, the kind of melodrama teenagers often write? Or was it a glimpse into the way he viewed her: a fixation, a possession, a relationship not built on quality but on control? Critics later pointed to the song as a smoking gun, proof that what might have seemed like inspiration was, in fact, a reflection of unhealthy obsession. But the lyrics alone didn't create the story. They fit into a larger pattern, one familiar in the modern age: the blurred lines between fans and artists online. For years, young admirers have connected with rising stars through social platforms, sometimes receiving replies, sometimes even entering private conversations. What starts as flattery can turn into intimacy, and what fuels a dream for a fan can become a trap. In her case, that pattern played out with devastating clarity. A young fan, enamored with the world of music and the persona of a rising artist, stepped into a private connection that was never meant to be equal. For him, the motive may have been as simple as access and control. With fame came attention, and with attention came opportunity. To someone older, the chance to mold and manipulate a younger admirer could feel easy, even natural. That imbalance of age, of power, of status created the perfect conditions for exploitation. The fake IDs, the secrecy, the concealment all pointed to the same motive: keeping her close, no matter what rules had to be broken. For investigators and the public, the grooming narrative became central to understanding not only what happened but why. This was not a romance between peers. It was a relationship born from imbalance, nurtured in secrecy, and sustained by manipulation. And at its heart was a young girl who believed she had found love, while in reality, she had been pulled into something far more dangerous. In the end, the words, the age gap, and the digital trail all pointed in the same direction. This was not just about affection. It was about power. And power, when left unchecked, can become deadly. In the digital age, the story of to not be separated from the role social media played in her life and in her death. It was the place where her connection to David began, where their relationship grew, and where the tragedy later exploded into the public eye. Platforms like TikTok and Discord created the stage. These were spaces built on endless scrolling and instant connection, where age boundaries were blurry at best. For Celeste, just 12 when their first interactions began, those spaces gave her access to people far older, far more experienced. There was no system in place to stop a child from entering a chat room filled with adults. No barrier strong enough to keep a young girl from direct contact with someone she admired. The lack of age controls meant that what should have been a safe environment turned into an open door. It was through these channels that their relationship deepened. A private message here, a shared video there, it all built slowly, quietly, until the bond seemed unbreakable. By the time David's music began gaining traction, TikTok's viral power made things even worse. Songs like Romantic Homicide spread across millions of screens, turning him into a star and her into a girl who believed she was attached to someone untouchable. Viral fame didn't just elevate him, it gave her more reason to stay close, to believe she was part of something bigger than herself. And eventually, those online interactions led to in-person meetings, pulling her from the screen into his world. The consequences didn't stop with her disappearance. After her body was discovered, social media once again carried the story, amplifying the pain and dividing the public. For her family, the constant flood of posts was unbearable. Not only did they lose their daughter, but they were forced to watch her memory dissected online, strangers debating her choices, her age, and her life as if it were entertainment. They endured threats, accusations, and endless reminders of the tragedy, each notification reopening wounds that had barely begun to close. For David's fans, the reaction was split. Some rushed to defend him, insisting that the relationship had been misunderstood, or that he was being targeted unfairly. Others turned against him completely, horrified by the evidence of grooming, the fake IDs, and the concealment. Fan pages that once celebrated his music fractured under the weight of the scandal, some going silent, others turning into platforms for debate and outrage. And then came the hashtag Justice for Celeste began trending, spreading far beyond her hometown or his fan base. It became a rallying cry for those who believed her story represented something larger, a failure of systems meant to protect children, the dangers of unchecked online spaces, and the imbalance of power between young fans and the celebrities they idolize. Thousands of posts carried her name, turning her memory into a movement. In the end, social media was both the stage and the amplifier. It enabled their connection, magnified his fame, and later carried the echoes of her death across the world. For her family, it was a source of trauma. For his fans, a source of division. And for the wider public, a reminder that in a world where lives play out online, the line between admiration and exploitation can vanish in a single viral moment. Every tragedy leaves behind questions, and every question eventually points to lessons. In Celeste's case, those lessons feel painfully clear. They are about the world we live in now, a world where children grow up online, where artists and fans can connect directly, and where the boundaries that once protected young people have eroded. The first lesson belongs to parents. No matter how difficult or uncomfortable it may be, parental supervision of a child's online life is essential. Celeste's story shows how quickly a casual chat can turn into something more, how easily admiration can be twisted into dependency. When a 12-year-old girl can spend hours on Discord or TikTok, speaking to someone older without detection, it is not just a personal risk, it's a family one. Parents cannot assume that technology will protect their children. They must step in, ask questions, and set boundaries, even when it feels invasive. The truth is that predators thrive in silence, and silence often grows in the absence of oversight. But the responsibility cannot fall only on families. This case also forces us to ask about the role of the law. The music industry thrives on the intimacy between artists and fans. Direct messages, live streams, and viral clips are now part of how careers are built. Yet, when those connections cross into exploitation, there is little legal framework to protect the vulnerable. An older artist can privately message a much younger fan, and unless something overtly criminal is uncovered, it may slip through the cracks. Celeste's story highlights the urgent need for stricter rules, clearer guidelines for how public figures interact with minors, harsher consequences when lines are crossed, and safeguards that prevent an industry built on adoration from becoming a pipeline for abuse. Laws should not only address what happens after a tragedy, but what could prevent it. Mandatory reporting for managers and staff who see red flags, stricter ID checks for events, and penalties for knowingly engaging with underage fans online are all measures that could save lives. Without them, young admirers will continue to be exposed to risks they cannot recognize or navigate on their own. Celeste's short life and tragic end stand as a warning. The internet erased the distance between her and the person she admired most. But it also erased the safety that distance once gave. For her family, the pain is permanent. For the rest of us, the responsibility is ongoing. Parents must watch closely, and lawmakers must act boldly. Because the truth is simple, without stronger protections, there will be another Celeste. Her story demands that we do better not just for her memory, but for every child who deserves to grow up free from fear, safe from exploitation, and allowed to dream without danger. For the lesson of the investigator, the ongoing investigation into the tragic death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez has dragged on for over a month since her dismembered body was discovered in the trunk of a Tesla on September 8, 2025, yet no arrests have been made, and the case remains shrouded in uncertainty. This stagnation is not just a procedural hiccup, it's a glaring issue that demands immediate attention from law enforcement, the public, and policymakers alike. Until now, the Los Angeles Police Department has conducted raids, seized electronic devices, and gathered forensic evidence, but the cause of death is still deferred pending toxicology reports, and no charges have been filed against anyone, including singer D4V, whose vehicle was the site of the gruesome discovery. This slow pace raises serious questions about the efficiency of the justice system. Especially in high-profile cases involving celebrities where media scrutiny can both accelerate and complicate proceedings. The lack of progress isn't merely frustrating, it's eroding public trust in institutions meant to protect the vulnerable. When investigations like this stall, it sends a message that justice can be delayed indefinitely, allowing potential perpetrators to continue their lives while victims' families endure endless agony. In Celeste's case, the delay has allowed for new developments, such as D4V transferring ownership of 2 Texas properties to his mother around the time of the body identification and raid on September 18, which some see as a move to shield assets amid the probe. Such actions only fuel speculation and highlight how the wealthy and famous might maneuver to insulate themselves, further underscoring why this sluggishness cannot be ignored. The responsibility to expedite the search for the truth and hold the guilty accountable falls squarely on the shoulders of investigators, prosecutors, and the broader legal framework. Law enforcement must prioritize resources to analyze the seized devices, finalize forensic reports, and build an airtight case without unnecessary postponements. Delaying justice in a case as heinous as this, where a 15-year-old girl's remains were found mutilated and concealed, risks not only failing Celeste but also perpetuating a cycle of harm that extends far beyond her individual story. If the perpetrator is not swiftly identified and brought to light, the consequences could be devastating, particularly for young people and their families. Teenagers, especially those navigating the treacherous waters of fandom and online interactions, are already at risk in a digital age where between admiration and exploitation. Celeste's alleged relationship with D4Vd, which reportedly began when she was just 12 and he was 16, exemplifies how social media platforms like Discord and TikTok can facilitate grooming without adequate safeguards. Without a rapid resolution, families of vulnerable youth may lose faith in the system's ability to protect their children, leading to heightened anxiety and overprotectiveness that stifles healthy development. Parents might second-guess every online friendship or celebrity crush, fearing it could escalate into something sinister, as it seemingly did here with fake IDs, secret cohabitation, and erased digital trails. Moreover, the absence of accountability could embolden predators who prey on impressionable fans, knowing that fame might buy them time or even immunity. We've seen this pattern in other celebrity scandals, where delays allow narratives to shift, evidence to fade, and public interest to wane, ultimately resulting in lesser charges or no conviction at all. Beyond the immediate impact on youth, the ripple effects on families are profound and heartbreaking. Celeste's loved ones have already endured unimaginable grief. The repeated disappearances in 2024, the police calls to their troubled home, and now the horror of her body's discovery. Without closure, they are trapped in a limbo of mourning, unable to fully heal or honor her memory. The fundraiser labeled her a beloved daughter. Yet the ongoing uncertainty mocks that sentiment, turning their private pain into a public spectacle amplified by social media threats and speculation. If the case isn't resolved promptly, it could set a dangerous precedent for similar incidents, signaling to society that crimes against minors, especially those involving power imbalances, can linger unresolved, discouraging victims from coming forward and allowing patterns of mistreatment to persist unchecked. Imagine a world where aspiring artists or influencers feel empowered to exploit young admirers, knowing that investigations might drag on indefinitely due to complexities like digital evidence or celebrity status. This precedent could normalize concealment tactics, from deleting Twitch streams to using bribes for silence, as alleged in Celeste's story. It undermines the very foundation of justice, where swift action deters future crimes and resources communities that no one is above the law. Policymakers must respond by advocating for reforms, such as stricter timelines for forensic analysis in child-related cases or enhanced training for handling digital grooming evidence, to prevent the stagnation from becoming the norm. The broader societal implications of a stalled investigation like this extend to how we view accountability in the entertainment industry. D4's rise from SoundCloud uploads to Billboard hits and Coachella stages captivated a generation, but the shadows cast by this case reveal the darker side of fame. If no one is held responsible, it could erode the trust young fans place in their idols, turning what should be inspirational figures into cautionary tales. Families across the country, already grappling with the challenges of raising teens in a hyper-connected world, might face increased isolation as they tighten controls on social media use, potentially stifling creativity and social growth. The precedent set here could echo in future cases, where delays become excuses for inaction, allowing more Celestes to fall through the cracks. We've witnessed similar scenarios in past high-file investigations, like those involving musicians accused of misconduct, where prolonged probes lead to faded memories, lost evidence, and ultimately, justice denied. To avoid this, authorities must act with urgency, collaborating with experts in digital forensics and to unravel the timeline from those initial 2021 Discord messages to the tragic end in 2025. Only by bringing the truth to light can we honor the lessons from Celeste's life and prevent her story from becoming a blueprint for evasion. In reflecting on this tragedy, it's impossible not to feel profound sorrow for Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a young girl whose life was cut brutally short before she could truly blossom. Born around 2010 in the quiet town of Lake Elsinore, California, she grew up amid family turmoil that no child should endure, 11 police visits in just over a year painting a picture of instability and pain. Yet, glimpses of her spirit shine through her love for Spider-Man, symbolizing perhaps her own quiet resilience in balancing chaos and hope. The tattoos on her young skin, "Shh," on her finger and "David" across her chest, marking a desperate search for identity and belonging. At 15, she should have been worrying about school dances, friendships, and dreams of the future, not vanishing into the allure of Hollywood Hills under false pretenses. Her disappearances in 2024, 3 times at age 13, were cries for escape, leading her into a web that ended in unimaginable horror. The discovery of her remains, dismembered and rotting in plastic bags, is a stark reminder of the fragility of youth and the monsters that lurk in unchecked power dynamics. Celeste was more than a victim, she was a beloved daughter, a fan with stars in her eyes, a girl who deserved safety and love. Her legacy, amplified by the Justice for Celeste hashtag and the memorial gatherings, calls us to remember her not just in tragedy, but in the light she brought to those who knew her. As the investigation lingers, our collective mourning deepens, urging us to demand better, for Celeste, for every young soul lost too soon, and for a world that must learn from her pain to protect its innocence. May her memory fuel the fire for justice, ensuring that no other family endures this endless weight, and that her short life sparks lasting change against the shadows that claimed her.